My name is Kristin Jensen, and I am a project manager in the University of Virginia Library. Since 2019, I have been working on a web-based project called EMMA, Educational Materials Made Accessible. The project director, John Unsworth, presented on EMMA at Charleston in 2021 when the service was still in development. We've now launched, and I'm here with major updates. After I take my turn, you'll hear from two other presenters who have been working on and working with EMMA over the past 5 years. EMMA was designed to promote collaboration between librarians as metadata experts and people who work in disability services for higher ed. Kyle Rimkus from the University of Illinois will give a case study of how that collaboration unfolded there. And then Bill Kasdorf, who has been an invaluable independent consultant to the EMMA project, will take a deeper dive on the subject of accessibility metadata in EMMA and beyond. We will take questions at the end. EMMA is, in brief, a platform for people who provide disability services in higher education to exchange accessible learning materials. Most colleges and universities have an office dedicated to meeting student access needs. And I'm going to refer to their staff collectively as DSOs for Disability Service Office, although you may know them as Access Services, Disability Resources, or another title. About 1/5 of undergraduate students in the US report having disabilities, including print disabilities. And that's any disability that hinders a student from consuming learning materials in print format. For students formally recognized as qualified end users with print disabilities, DSOs provide texts and learning materials in alternate formats, such as electronic text, Braille, accessible PDF, accessible EPUB, and audio formats. If a text is not already available in the required format, the DSO will go through the labor-intensive process of remediation, either changing a text from one format to another or adding enhancements. For example, a print text might be scanned, OCR'd, and corrected to produce an accurate electronic text. A plain electronic text might be marked up with structures needed to navigate it with an audio reader. Several years ago, my boss, John Unsworth, realized that a lot of this remediating labor is probably being duplicated between campuses. Each campus has its own DSO serving the needs of its students, but the same text could be assigned in many schools. So that realization inspired the development of EMMA as a place for DSOs to share their work products with each other. In a precursor study, Unsworth and several co-authors found that, by and large, DSOs do not share accessible text with each other, in part due to widespread anxiety about any dealings with publishers and a fear of retaliation or legal action, leveraging copyright law against universities. That's understandable, because nobody wants to open their employer to a lawsuit. But the fact is that the Marrakesh Treaty and US copyright law allow a specific carve-out for reproducing and distributing texts in alternative formats without payment to or permission from the original publisher to qualified end users with print disabilities. With a mission to change this culture of copyright fear and promote sharing of accessible texts in higher education, Unsworth obtained funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to build EMMA. The project started with the publication of a legal white paper explaining DSO's right to share remediated texts under the right circumstances and avoid duplication of labor. Then 8 universities, including the University of Virginia, participated in designing and piloting EMMA. There were 3 big technical tasks in creating EMMA. One was to create a metadata model for describing accessible texts so that when DSOs exchange with each other, they know what they're getting. The second was to create a secure repository where these texts can be exchanged with trusted partners who will use them only for meeting the needs of qualified end users with print disabilities. And the final task was to create a federated search where users can simultaneously obtain results not only from the nascent EMMA repository, but also from much larger repositories, including 7.4 million holdings in the Internet Archive and over 37,000 texts in the Accessible Content e-portal maintained by the Ontario Council of University Libraries. We launched EMMA to beta users in April 2024, and within a week, we had 75 new member institutions. As of late November, we have 245 member institutions. The Emma repository has been populated with over 4,100 educational resources uploaded by members. Emma is free to join, and we are working on a long-term funding plan to maintain Emma as a free service. The launch of Emma in April 2024 came about in near conjunction with two other developments affecting the provision of accessible texts to students in higher education. One of those developments was an update to the regulations for the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, Title II. This final rule from the Department of Justice was published on April 24th. The Title II update constitutes a mandate for all public colleges and universities with compliance deadlines in April 2026 or 27, depending on the size of the population being served. In brief, digital content used in delivering programs and services of publicly funded entities must now be accessible to the standard of WCAG 2.1 AA at the point of delivery to the user. With some very narrow exceptions, it will no longer be acceptable to make users with disabilities request accommodations for digital documents and go through the process of remediation. Digital materials, such as digital course materials, must be accessible from the get-go. Now, because texts obtained through Emma can only legally be shared with users who have formally documented print disabilities, Emma is not going to be an appropriate tool for making digital materials accessible to all. Universities will need to demand that publishers and e-learning vendors meet accessibility standards. However, the Title II update does not apply to print materials, which will still need to be remediated, and some students will need accommodations beyond the WCAG standard. Emma will still have a role in sharing those remediations. Another development that also emerged in April this year was the sudden collapse of a service that was widely relied upon by DSOs for obtaining accessible texts. That service was called Access Text Network, or ATN. Now, I'm going to skip to the end of the story and tell you that ATN has come back, but it has come back under different circumstances. From 2009 until April 1st of this year, ATN was administered by the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation at the Georgia Institute of Technology, or Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech partnered with the Association of American Publishers, or AAP, to help DSOs obtain electronic copies of texts provided by participating publishers for qualified end users with print disabilities. In this partnership, ATN offered efficiencies for both DSOs and publishers by allowing DSOs to submit requests for alternate formats by a simple unified form. However, to participate in ATN, DSOs had to agree to a restrictive set of rules in excess of the requirements imposed by copyright law. For example, the ATN agreement includes a clause requiring the DSO to destroy their copy of an accessible text after the qualified end user completes their course, and a clause preventing the DSO from reusing an accessible text for a second student with the same access needs. Despite these restrictive terms, DSOs almost universally relied on ATN to meet many of their students' needs for accessible texts. When Georgia Tech ceased to administer ATN earlier this year, DSOs across the country felt left in the lurch. After several weeks, the AAP resurrected ATN under their own administration without the Georgia Tech partnership. DSOs have understandably returned to ATN, but those of us working on Emma felt that the disruption created an opportunity to educate DSOs about their rights under the Marrakesh Treaty and the trade-off involved in waiving those rights for the sake of ATN's user agreement. We believe that the ATN user agreement represents the strictest, most defensive stance taken by some of the publishers who make up the AAP. Other publishers are more willing to supply their books in alternative formats, subject only to the requirement inherent in copyright law that copies are only distributed to qualified end users with print disabilities. Emma has started working directly with such publishers. Our first publisher partnership with the University of Michigan Press was announced in early September, and we are actively seeking additional publishers to work with. Emma can relieve publishers of the work of screening and fulfilling requests for alternate format texts while fulfilling download requests for DSOs instantaneously. That said, Emma did not start out with the mission to replace ATN as a pipeline to publishers, but rather to give DSOs a secure, well-organized repository for sharing texts across institutions. The more educational materials that users upload, the more other users will be able to find. User contributions are what will make Emma valuable as a resource for disability services. I'm going to turn now to Kyle Rimkus, who will talk about his experience assisting with Emma uploads as a library partner to his campus's DSO. Bill Kasdorf will then circle back to the crucial subject of metadata.
Thank you, Kristin. That was an excellent overview. So, as Kristin mentioned, I'm going to talk about the Emma partner experience. I'm a librarian at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I worked on the grant for the first two rounds, about 2019 to 2023. And our university was really engaged in testing this core concept of bringing libraries and disability services organizations, or DSOs, closer together. For a little bit of background on our library, we've been involved in large-scale digitization of books for a long time. Some of the numbers on this slide are a little out of date, but we work with Internet Archive, Google Books. We have a local digitization program, and we funnel everything we digitize into HathiTrust, which is just to say that we have a lot of experience with metadata, with depositing into various repositories. And it was really interesting for us to get to know our Disability Resources and Educational Services Unit, which we refer to as DRES, just a few blocks away from the library, and getting to know how they do digitization as well in service of students on our campus with documented print disabilities. Now, I'm going to make some broad generalizations in talking about how the way that we in libraries approach digitization versus the way that DSOs do so. But I would say that we generally in libraries feel like we can take our time turning through our backlog of stuff we want to digitize, whereas in DSOs, students often need a digitized, remediated text this semester. They need it next week. So the timeline, there tends to be more urgency there. We in libraries feel much more comfortable digitizing stuff in the public domain, whereas DSOs are often digitizing texts that are newly published, still protected by copyright, that students need for their courses, to participate in their courses or undertake their graduate research. With both of us run digitized texts through OCR software to generate searchable texts. In libraries, although this is changing with some of those ADA guidelines, we tend to tolerate imperfection in our OCR. But in DSOs, OCR transcripts are often corrected by hand, and structure is brought to them with the goal of them being accessible via screen reader software. And in terms of access, we librarians love depositing into open access repositories like HathiTrust, but DSOs have traditionally provided access on a user-by-user basis. There hasn't been a repository for them, and that gap, that lack of a repository, is a need that Emma seeks to fill. Now, when a new organization joins Emma, that kind of top tier of this image is something that a library and a DSO will need to negotiate. Kind of sit down, get to know the Emma deposit tools, get to know the way that the DSO does its work, and figure out what the best method is for depositing into the repository. We got to know DRES a little bit at the beginning of our process. The University of Illinois has a student body of approximately 60,000 students, 20,000 grad students, about 37,000 undergrads. And of these students, DRES has remediated resources for 234 people over the past 4 years. In total, that constituted digitizing and remediating over 270,000 pages, about 800 books, 300 and so articles, and it all told, it was about 8,500 hours of work. So that's what DRES has been doing over the past 4 years. Now, in addition to those numbers, we wanted to get to know, well, what file formats are they producing? And one thing that became clear on the grant is that this varies quite a bit from one DSO to another and can differ from one student's needs to another. So and often there are file formats that we librarians are not as knowledgeable of as we are of our traditional formats that we produce in our digitization workflows. There, people might produce files that could be used to produce Braille or audio files. It turned out that at our DSO at DRES, the preferred file format was Microsoft Word. And this, we found that, that was just the culture of our DSO was such that they had, they and their students who used their services, Word became the one that was most common. Some places preferred PDF, or sometimes, a student might prefer PDF, but it, as I said, it would differ quite a bit based on the needs of the student and the DSO. So we really sought to devise an efficient deposit workflow for files that our DSO was producing. And as we started investigating this throughout the course of the grant, Emma's developers introduced some really great tools for importing bibliographic metadata into the repository during the deposit process. So in addition to just depositing a file, you want to describe it using metadata, and uh, there are tools for entering an ISBN number and importing bibliographic metadata from WorldCat or Google Books, which are really useful. It means that we don't need to have pristine metadata in spreadsheets that we import into the system. We can rely on decades of library automation and work that people in our field have done to build up these repositories of bibliographic metadata and and bring it in that way. But, and Bill will talk more about this shortly, we are not only keeping track of bibliographic metadata in the system, we're importing information about remediation actions, about file formats, and these are things that we in libraries don't have as much knowledge of as our colleagues in our DSOs. So, uh, and it also extends to things like documenting whether remediation actions were taken on a full or a partial work, because sometimes a student might just need a single chapter, and uh, that needs to be reflected in the metadata. So what we found was that what worked for us, at least at this phase in our process, was that the library served in kind of an advisory capacity on metadata issues as they arose, as well as getting to know the deposit tools and training staff in our DSO on how to use them. But the person doing the deposit was a staff member at DRES, and they were using Emma's single upload tool to put in an ISBN, draw in bibliographic metadata from WorldCat, and then rekey metadata about what remediation actions were taken and completing the deposit. Now, we did wish to uh, contribute back to the community some information on how much time this took. And for that one staff member, they spent about 100 hours dealing with around 800 legacy titles, and that took them they were able to do so at a clip of about 8 books per hour. So in terms of planning for what it would take to go through a backlog of digital texts, that was what we experienced. And many DSOs do have hard drives of legacy files that they've remediated sitting, under their desks or on servers. And one of the things that we have sought to do is provide a model for working through those backlogs. Now, we do feel that in the future, we can do better. As I mentioned, there are bulk upload tools in Emma, and really where we want to go is setting up something where DRES can kind of put all their files in one place, use a tracking spreadsheet, and bulk upload everything in an efficient manner at the end of each semester. Haven't quite got there yet at our institution, but one thing that I'm kind of excited about in the Emma community is to see how different institutions will approach this problem, and how we can work together to develop, efficient workflows together. But that has been our experience so far. And with that, I will hand the baton to Bill.
Thank you very much, Kyle. And I want to say that let me get my screen up here. University of Illinois has been really a critical partner in this, and many of you attending here probably know that they've really been in the vanguard of information science issues in general. And so a lot of the initial brain trust behind Emma comes out of Illinois, although of course it's mainly UVA. So those two universities have just been indispensable. So anyway, basically, let's see here. Especially since we're talking to Charleston, most of you are probably librarians and you're thinking, well, we've already got accessibility metadata. What are you talking about? Well, yeah, there is a lot of accessibility metadata already in existence, and we do not want to conflict or interfere with this metadata. So just to give a quick summary, there's a fundamental model that is incorporated into the Emma model that is expressed as a schema.org vocabulary for websites, and that includes online journals, for example. Articles that are online as HTML has an accessibility vocabulary, and that exact same vocabulary is in the EPUB Accessibility 1.1, which is now an international formal recommendation from the W3C. So it's got real status and weight in the international community. In the EPUB work, we worked with the schema.org folks to develop this vocabulary collaboratively, so they're absolutely identical. Subsequent to that, we also realized that accessibility is needed for ONIX, which is supply chain metadata in the publishing world, and MARC, which is important in the library world. The ONIX crosswalk uses what's called code list 196, and it's a pretty complete, pretty explicit crosswalk between the accessibility metadata that's built into EPUBs and online, which is the fundamental authoritative accessibility metadata. Less so for MARC because it's a much more complicated model and it works in a very different way. So we had a number of librarians in the working group working on this crosswalk. And so we have a published way to exchange metadata so that you populate your MARC records as much as possible. So the issue is that this metadata model and its crosswalks don't provide everything that a DSO needs or a student needing remediated content needs to know about something that they're exchanging. Obviously, first they need to know bibliographic metadata, but that goes beyond just an ISBN because, well, first of all, you have to be careful what ISBN you're using. And also, oftentimes, it's a specific edition of a book that is being used in the classroom. They have to have the exact resource that the faculty has put on the syllabus. They also need to know what features does it have. Yes, there's accessibility feature is one of the properties in the standard accessibility metadata. But these are features in a different sense of what things might need to be fixed. So for example, does this book, let's just use a book as an example, is it full of tables? If so, that's really important for the DSO to know because they're difficult to remediate. Does it have a lot of complex images? Does it have math or chemistry, et cetera, et cetera? And has it been remediated? Ideally, everything that goes into the Emma repository will have been remediated, but remediated how, for whom? So, a given book might be remediated as an EPUB for a student that has low vision and needs to be able to reflow and zoom in on the content, but it may be remediated in an entirely different way for a blind student that's using a screen reader. So do the images have image descriptions? Is the MathML, et cetera? That's really important to know. And then finally, as Kyle mentioned, what formats are available? Is this accessible EPUB 3? Is it a PDF? If so, is it text-based PDF at least, or is it just an image PDF? Is it a Word file? Is it an HTML file, et cetera? So the Emma metadata model, as Kyle gave you a peek at, consists of identifiers way beyond just the ISBN, because you need to identify who did the remediation, for whom was it done, et cetera, et cetera. So there's very local identifiers, and there are more public identifiers. There's all the bibliographic metadata, administrative metadata, who remediated this, which DSO at what university, when was it submitted, what source file did they use, how did they get that source file, et cetera. That's important to know. And then the specifically remediation metadata, which is what format is this, what file type is it, what features does it have, what's the text quality, is it just OCR'd, has it been proofread, is it the published text, any comments that the DSO wants to include, et cetera. And we had an advisory board as we were developing Emma. The project was called Frame during the grant period. And there were a couple of folks, including a good friend of mine, George Kirscher, who's, I think of as internationally Mr. Accessibility. He's a fabulous guy. And he said, gee, NISO ought to standardize this metadata. Well, we did, or we are, I should say. It's called the Accessibility Remediation Metadata Working Group in NISO. And we're on a 2-year schedule, and it's not just a recommended practice, it's actually a standards track in NISO. And it doesn't just adopt the Emma model, it goes way beyond the Emma model, because Emma was just developed by, keep in mind, 6 DSOs at 6 universities, and it specifically addressed what they said they needed. And beyond that, it was specific to higher ed. It was for DSOs and libraries at colleges and universities, whereas ARM, NISO's model, needs to go way beyond that. It needs to go to schools, libraries, public libraries, interchange of content between individuals, all kinds of things, all kinds of exchanges of accessible content need to be addressed. Emma was, the model was designed specifically for the repository at UVA that is the Emma repository, whereas ARM has to be broadly applicable anywhere and address a much broader set of use cases. Emma was specifically print-focused and specifically book-focused, whereas ARM is going to address a lot more disabilities, institutions, constituencies. So what we've done in that group is to form 6 different subgroups addressing different aspects of the issue. Resource sharing between parties, disabilities other than print disabilities. There's a group working on that. There's a group working on non-text media like video and audio. There's a group addressing primary and secondary education because Emma is specifically higher ed. And those that are specific to higher ed, there are issues like paywalls, LMSs, et cetera, that need to be taken into account. And then internationalization issues, especially issues important to developing countries. So these are the organizations that are in the ARM working group. And I'll have to say, this is a real top flight group of folks, very broad representation from publishers, standards organizations, accessibility organizations, libraries, different types of publishers. Norton has been a pioneer in accessibility work for many, many years, et cetera. So it's a great group. So thanks very much for your attention, and we will now take questions.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Kyle.